Hello, welcome to video 14. In this video, I'm going to be talking about user research, but in particular, I want to focus on what we think about and how we do user research, especially if we're focused on user experience design. So this is a typical interaction design process, especially common when you look at user-centered design. And this is also the process that you would have learned from fundamentals of interaction design. Maybe perhaps you weren't taught anything about desk research and commercial, sort of that includes research material and also commercial stuff, which you did in the last tutorial. So just to reiterate, during the desk research, which is probably the first thing that you should be doing, is before you attempt to find a solution for a design brief, is to first understand what has really been done in the domain of interest, or in the design brief you're trying to answer. So it's really important that we don't just rush out and do user research, and worst of all, it's some people just rush out and create a solution even before talking to users. So after the desk research, you'll have a better understanding of what has been done, both in research and also in commercial offerings. Then what we do then is actually take that understanding and refine our inquiry and go and do user research. So in the user research, as you can see in the box on the left, top left, is to gain a more focused understanding about a particular group of users. So which means about narrowing down the demographics. Do you need to narrow down demographics? Okay, and think carefully about that, and what's the value in narrowing down to a demographic. And then what you want to do during the user research is actually looking at the activity that the users undertake, the goals that they undertake, that they want to achieve with that activity within that domain of interest. And whatever you found from the user research, you'll, after analysis, you would come up with a new understanding about the domain of interest. That would also feed into then the needs and the requirements of your users. And through an ideation process, you'll come up with some design, hopefully a couple of design ideas, and then you prototype and you build an interactive version. You go back to redesign after some sort of evaluation, and you keep prototyping and evaluating and going back to redesign until you come up with a final prototype. So notice that usability evaluation is part of the evaluation that you do in user-centered design. But how must the process be different? So if we're talking about in video 2 that user experience design is different from user-centered design in terms of the fact that it's actually an extension of user-centered design. So do we need to think about our user research a bit differently? Yes, the answer is because we must ensure that the user research now captures and represents people's experiences. So we must understand how people experience the current activity that we want to design for. So in our situation, if we're designing for commuting experiences, we must first start with understanding what is the current commuting experiences. Okay, what are the great things that happens during commute? What happens during commute? What do people feel about commuting? What people think about commuting? And how do people act during commuting? Okay, and also what are the pain points in commuting? Before we then come out with an idea that is a user experience design solution to improve the experience of commuting. And so the capturing of experiences and the working with the experiences right through the interaction design process needs to happen in user research. So user research, we need to find methods, and we need to also make sure that our questions that we ask people are able to capture experiences, not just needs, which is more what we do in user-centered design. The artifacts that we produce during the design process, so like the persona, the scenarios, user experience stories, and all the different things that we produce, even storyboards, we must find a way in which experience is also visible in those things. Okay, whereas in user-centered design, they're not there usually. Okay, and down to prototyping and evaluation. So when you prototype, you don't just prototype the functionality, you also prototype how will people experience this. And when you evaluate, you don't just evaluate whether the solution meets people's needs, but also does it support the kind of experiences that you have aimed for in the first place. So looking at the interaction design process now, I'm going to sort of blow it up a little bit to show you how then it's looking for a user-centered design. So user experience design, sorry. So in the user research, we must think about methods and tools that can better capture and analyze experiences. We still produce personas after that, after we analyze the user research. But the persona, as I said before, we need to sort of display or reveal some of the experiences that a person has. Okay, we also will create UX stories, user experience stories, and then we'll have an ideation process. We'll come up with ideas, and then we go into that feedback loop of design and redesign through evaluation. But notice that in the evaluation section, we have not just usability evaluation, so we need to conduct usability evaluation, but we also need to conduct user experience evaluation. And on the left-hand side of the diagram, you can see that there are other artifacts to try and describe and capture experiences. Okay, so like user journey itself, which you'll be learning in this subject. But for now, I'm just going to talk about the first part, which is actually user research. So something that happens after you have conducted your desk research. Now, the methods and approaches to capture experiences in user research, there are a couple of ways to do that. Okay, so the method itself needs to remember that experience is subjective. It's very reflexive, so it's hard for people to talk to you about the experience, and emergent. Okay, it's subject to change and revision. So people can say, well, it's good today, but maybe tomorrow it could be bad. Okay, so what we need to use, and what is actually more appropriate to use, is actually, or in addition to the questions that we normally ask in user-centered design, is actually using stories and storytelling approaches. Because stories include events happening over time. Stories are a way in which people tell you about what happened, but it's a way of reflecting about it. Okay? So number two, we also need to find ways to capture actions, thoughts, and feelings. That's what, remember, when you're writing a journal itself, experience is not just about feelings, but also about what people do, what people think. Okay? And also the different factors. So again, stories are really useful, because stories usually contain, when people tell you about something that happened in a story, they usually automatically tell you about what they did and what they think and how they feel about different things. And even hopefully people would tell you about the factors in the environment that play a role in that story. So again, stories are very important. The third one is that we need to find a way to capture the past, the present, people's past, present, and hopes for the future. So again, stories would help, but there are other techniques that we can use to specifically look at past, look at the current, and look at for hopes. Probes, if you've done human-centered design methods, you can use probes to capture aspects of that. I have also tried to use tarot card. It's a way of telling fortune, but I don't use that to tell fortune so much, but actually use way to explore with my user during the user research in their past, presence, and hopes. Sometimes we can use evocative objects. So asking a person to say, can you show me one of your most treasured object that you own? And from there, you can actually ask people about why is it treasured object, and then you can get a sense about their past, and sense about why is it still important to them, and also maybe hopefully get a sense about their aspirations and their hopes for the future. So these are the different things that we can use on top of interview questions. So remember, it's not just about using stories on its own, using probes on its own, or using tarot card evocative objects, but in combination with talking, asking questions, clarifying, probing. Okay? But overall, what I'm trying to say is that the methods that we use to capture experiences should be qualitative methods. So methods in which you produce information about people's life, not in terms of numbers. So capturing about people, how many times do you use a phone might be important, but you don't get enough information about why, okay, or how. Okay, so quantitative ways of capturing experiences doesn't quite work. Okay. There are people who try to do that by putting sensors around and detecting heartbeat, detecting how much people sweat, looking at the size of the dilation of the pupils, but I don't think that is really useful. What's more useful is understanding how people think, how people make sense, what people are feeling, and what people do. Okay. So common research methods, again, I'm trying to put them down together for you. So interview is very important, as I said, but we now have the interview in conjunction with stories. Okay, and I'll talk more about that in another video about how you can do interviews with stories. Diary is a really good one. So giving people a diary to keep about their commuting experiences over a week could capture how different things happen. Okay, and diary doesn't also need to be just a paper diary that we're used to. It could be an electronic diary that's formatted on a phone. You could create a little app that people can capture, or people can use a video camera to do like a video blog. People can take photographs if they don't want to capture a video of the surroundings and then write about it and talk about it. Okay, so it's different ways of doing stuff. Another one of doing that is actually called experience sampling. Experience sampling is used a lot in commercial research of users, and what you do is when you sample is that, for instance, if I am if I want to sample my participants' experiences while they're commuting, is that I find out what times they usually commute during the day, and at different times during the week, I would send them a text message with a short question about asking them about what are they doing, how are they feeling. Okay, so maybe I'll do that like today at 9 o'clock in the morning. Tomorrow I might do that like at 5 o'clock in the evening. Okay, so it's sampling at different times and randomly sending them text message for them to reply to you. I've talked about probes in terms of something that you have learned at human-centered design methods. If you have done that subject, I won't be teaching that probes here, but for some of you who have learned that and you want to use the probes, you certainly now can see and understand how probes can be used to understand people's present, people's past, and people's aspirations, as well as people's experiences, but in a kind of fragmented way. However, when you supplement probes with interviews, you get a more full picture of their experience. Of course, cards and tarot cards are another way of doing that. Again, I'm not going to teach you about that, but I just want to mention that so that you understand what are the options and what's available at the moment. Observation, survey, and focus group are less useful because when you observe people, you don't know really what people are thinking. Okay, you can see what they're doing, but you don't know how they're thinking and feeling. Okay, there's also a lot of design methods and tools that's available from my IDEO. If you click on that link, you'll see the design kit for user research. But the most important thing is actually the orange block of text, which is that each of these methods that I'm telling you about has its pros and cons. What you need to do as a good interaction designer is to understand the strengths and the weaknesses of this method so that you know what you're capturing and what you're not going to get, and you know how to compensate for that. Okay, so in all methods and all the tools that you use in interaction design, like persona even, like in user journey, you really need to understand what it's good for and what it's not good for, and so that you'll know what you're learning from it and what you're getting out of that tool. So user research in user experience design is not just about asking people what you need, what your problems are. Okay, but it's actually to clarify, to define, to understand their situation, their problems, their needs and problems, opportunities, but also what they want and what they find meaningful. Okay, so don't forget to ask things like that. But in relation to what they're doing and what their goals are, okay, what their needs and their context and in their situation. We also need to find out what are some of the problematic experiences they have and what they would desire in that situation and what will be meaningful to them in that situation. So basically what this slide is trying to remind you is that don't just ask people what they want and what their needs are. While it is important as a user experience designer You also need to uncover why is something meaningful, why is something problematic, and what are some of the opportunities when you look at and understand what people's situation is to support. Okay, sometimes people can't tell you what the solution would be, but you, when you do the analysis, and if you really get close into and be empathetic about people's situation, you might start to understand what are some of the things that would help and alleviate some of the problems, or even make something more interesting and more meaningful. This is a large diagram, but I just want you to again think about when you ask and observe people about in your interview, and when you talk to people about what they're doing and how they experience, what we usually do is try and focus on a specific activity. So in this case, commuting. Okay, now commuting is set within an everyday life. Okay, so commuting is just part of everyday life, and it's part of a specific area of life. But our focus is actually on the commuting itself and the goals of commuting. But you can't forget that people commute because of a specific area, because they need to go to work, because they need to go to study. Okay, and why they need to go to work and why they need to go to study? Because in their everyday life, they need to make money. They need to find a way to advance their career. So everything is actually related to each other. Okay, so when you do user research, you need to choose your focus. So for us, it's about focusing on the specific activity of commuting, but understanding that commuting is part of an area of life and part of everyday life. And then within the focus of the specific activity, look at the goals, look at the needs, look at the challenges, look at the difficulties, and look at how people feel and think and do in that activity. And as UX designers, we want to identify opportunities. To intervene means to make a change in the current situation to make things better. Okay, so part of it also is understanding what is desirable to them and what's meaningful to them, so that we can support them in our solution. And just to repeat what I said before in the previous slide, sometimes people don't know what is desirable or meaningful. People can just tell you what bugs them and what the situation at the moment is. You just want to be able then to find a way to reveal what is meaningful to people. For instance, if you were an Uber app developer, people might not tell you that they want to have their journey tracked by a friend or by their family members, but maybe they tell you that they feel a bit unsafe. They feel like when they're taking taxis, their friends never know where they are, or that they will feel safe if somehow there's a way in which the family members know about their progress of the journey. And as a designer, then you think, okay, how can I make that happen as a feature, or how can I make that happen as a technical solution of the application itself? So we're interested in the experience of commuting, and this is actually some of the questions that I think will be helpful to you when you're asking about people's commuting experiences. In the orange box, I'm saying that you could be asking people to tell you stories and keep diaries of the commuting experience. I'm going to talk about stories in another lecture, video lecture, for this week. But what you need to understand, I've tried to capture that in that light blue box. First of all, I think you need to understand how people do the activity of commuting. So how is that activity accomplished? How do people conduct commuting? Okay, what's involved in the commuting? Does it involve paying? Does it involve walking first to the stop? Does it involve waiting? Okay, does it and what does that waiting mean, and how is it felt? Okay, and when and how often is the activity conducted? Why do people commute? Okay, what's the activity? Why is it? What's the average duration of the activity itself? Okay, and you can ask about how do people feel about that later on? Okay, and what do people think about their commuting? why do they think that way? Why is really important because it reveals the inner thoughts and the inner motivations, maybe fears as well. Okay, and what factors affect their thoughts about commuting? Okay, is it because about their friends who tell them about this, or is it about their family members, or how they feel about safety? How do people feel about the commuting in terms of the factors that affect their feelings of commuting itself? What technologies do people use to support or improve their commuting experiences? When are they used? Okay, so I didn't put it here, but is the technology used prior to commuting to plan the commuting, or are the technologies used during the commuting itself? Okay, so and also why the specific technologies are used? Why not something else? Why do they choose Street View instead of instead of another planning application? Why did they use YouTube instead of, let's say, another video platform? How are they used? Are they used to just for entertainment, and why are they used? Also, is it used for entertainment or used to basically to get away, okay, or to keep themselves awake? So there are many different things that you need to be able to explore and understand. And what do people wish and hope for commuting? Usually it's people talking about kind of bored, resting, de-stressing, and trying to do something. But you need to explore that. And what kind of pain points are related to commuting? And as you know, I mean, there's some pain points in which we can help, but some pain points that we can't. Like we can't, as an interaction designer, increase the number of cars or increase the number of buses and trains. Okay, but we can help them maybe find the right train more easily. Okay, or we can maybe help them identify the conditions of the train itself. Then suggest questions, asking questions that relate to the various factors that can affect people's experiences. What about the social, the physical, the environmental, and also the sense of self? And that's why I ask you to do your journal first. That's why the journal is very important, because it just reminds you that experience is more than just about feelings or what people do, and that it includes all these other factors. So in terms of doing this user research, we need to first of all recruit, choose the tools, conduct the research, transcribe the data, analyze the data. And then after that, from what we understand about that, and then we just create the personas and create a set of experience stories. And this is a deliverable that you need to do by about week 6. And as I repeat myself here again, qualitative approaches are the best. And I'm going to suggest that we use interviews and stories, and I'm going to talk about that in another video. So I hope you've got an idea about how UX research in terms of user research is a little bit different from UCD user research, and that different tools are available and the different kind of questions that you need to ask and also consider. Thank you.